My talk today is going to be a little bit about sulfur. So when we apply in gypsum, you apply in sulfur. 18% of the gypsum is sulfur. So we're going to look at the effect of the sulfur we're applying in how the crop responds to sulfur application. So sulfur is it's an essential plant nutrient. It's just like nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. Sulfur is as important, and it's needed in relatively high quantity. And sulfur is a major constituent of some amino acids, such as cysteine, cysteine, and methionine. So when sulfur is low in the crop, the levels of this amino acid is also low, and that will inhibit some the synthesis of certain protein and may affect the quality of the crop, etc. It also play an important role in photosynthesis. That's probably why we get the yellowish color when there's sulfur deficiency in the crop. So the sulfur concentration in plant is usually between 0.1 to 0.3% in the tissue. And this number might vary under certain conditions, so we might get it as low as 0.05% or as high as 0.9%, depending on the crop and the stage you're taking the measurement. So the major sources of sulfur for crop productivity is soil, the sulfur containing in the soil, and the sulfur in the atmosphere above the soil. So we could get sulfur as wet and dry deposition, so the tissue of the plant can absorb sulfur dioxide through the leaves, and the wet deposition. I think most of you are probably familiar with the acid rain, and most of the agricultural sulfur used to come from acid rain. So before this environmental regulation, because of the concern of the acid rain, most of the agricultural sulfur was coming from the contamination of those power plants with nitrate oxide and sulfur oxide. Sort of a contamination for the environment, but was beneficial somewhat to agriculture because we were getting sulfur from it. So because of environmental concern, in 1990, we had a broad adaptation of the Clean Air Act Amendment, which kind of had power plants remove the sulfur from their stream before they can release it. And as a consequence of that, we're losing most of the sulfur that we used to get from the acid rain. So now power plants are removing more than almost 90% of the sulfur. As a consequence, the atmospheric sulfur deposition is reducing, and this is the data from the area of Wayne County, and we're seeing almost an 80% of reduction in atmospheric sulfur deposition. This being a major source of sulfur, of soil sulfur, we also now tend to grow variety that are more high-yielded variety and more intensive cropping. So when we harvest, we remove a lot of sulfur from the soil. So this creates some kind of imbalance between what we put into the soil and what we take in from it. So we generate this data from studies that we have conducted. It's a more update table on how much sulfur removal we get. So it depends on the crop. It depends on which part of the crop we're harvesting. And so sulfur, for instance, the left side of the graph is showing how much we remove from a given soil by harvesting corn, soybean, or wheat. And the other one, it's the right side is more of if we were, like putting an example, if we were to harvest 180 bushel of corn, that will mean that we will probably removing 9 pounds of sulfur from the soil. And the more we harvest, the more sulfur we remove from the soil. And it's different between crops, and it's different for the same crop between which part of the plant we're harvesting. For instance, for corn silage, it's going to be much higher than for grain corn. Another factor that is influencing how much sulfur we are putting in the soil, how much sulfur we're removing, there's a reduction in the use of certain fertilizer that used to contain a lot more sulfur. For instance, the yellow line is for is it single or ordinary superphosphate? Single superphosphate that we used to use a lot, and now there's a almost 90% decrease in the use of single superphosphate. And it's being replaced by probably triple superphosphate that had a higher content of phosphorus instead of sulfur. So there's a preference for NPK over sulfur. So we can expect, or we'll tend to think that there's probably some kind of imbalance in sulfur. We're not putting as much sulfur as we're removing from the soil. So we'll expect that we probably have deficiency of sulfur in certain crop in certain areas. So there has been some reports from all over the world of how deficiency of sulfur may affect crop productivity. So that's what so now we're trying to address sulfur deficiency. And how do we address sulfur deficiency? By applying sulfur-containing fertilizer, such as dry fertilizer, fluid fertilizer, elemental sulfur, or through manure application, especially in organic farming. So for the example of dry fertilizer I just gave, there's a special interest in using gypsum, not only because it supplies sulfur and calcium in forms that are readily available for plants, but also there's these associated benefits with soil calcium magnesium balance in the soil, and possible benefits in soil structure and water infiltration rate, etc. So there's also studies or survey conducted actually by a former faculty at The Ohio State University about the return on investment using gypsum. So on the survey they conducted, they found that farmers have reported to see almost $6 as a return on each dollar they spend on gypsum on the long term. And this is especially for crops that have high sulfur requirements, such as alfalfa. Now, long term is pretty subjective. Is it 10, 20, or 30 years? It's low. So we also had the question on how do crops respond to sulfur fertilization. Sulfur is an issue. We're addressing this deficiency by applying sulfur. Now what? What do we expect from the application of sulfur? Do I apply my gypsum because I want to address sulfur deficiency, or do I only apply for calcium-magnesium ratio? So we conducted several research in Ohio as a research team on several crops, several counties, and we're looking at the response of sulfur. How do crops respond to sulfur? Would I expect to see a yield response? Is my R1 sulfur going to be greater in plants that have received an application of gypsum? So we conducted 48 trials in corn, 34 in soybean, 8 wheat trial, and we have 10 forage trial, which are on organic farms, especially for the forage. So I'll be presenting data. I will synthesize the data and present data for over 100 trials on crop response to sulfur. But because of time, I will only be presenting the result from this research. The first one is part of my thesis, is on corn and forage and oats on organic farms. These are commercial farms that are near homes in Wayne County. We have some of them in Logan County, Hardin County. We work directly with farmers in this project. And then there's also some research that have been conducted back in 2013 on soybean. And we'll be presenting data from OSU farm, corn and soybean trials, and some of the recent on-farm strip trials as part of the tri-state fertilization recommendation update. So the first one is my thesis, looking at the response of gypsum on organic farm. I won't go much about the methodology, but what we did basically is applying gypsum at 1 ton in all sites, and we have like some control plot. It was a block design, so we have some control, and we applied gypsum at 1 ton per acre. And all sites, because these are organic sites, almost all sites receive 1 or 2 applications of manure throughout the growing season. And the map is just highlighting the counties where we had the trial actually. In Wayne, in Holmes County, Hardin, and Logan County, and we had an on-station site in Franklin County in Columbus. So when we look at the R1 sulfur concentration in the leaves, we see a positive sulfur response in almost every crops, every site, right after the application. So for the on-farm site, we did do the application of gypsum. We apply at the beginning of each growing season for the 2017 and 2018. So we have 2 consecutive gypsum application over the 2 years. And so the first quadrant is looking at 2017 and 2018. So we have different crop rotation in every site, and but mostly for almost all sites, we did see an increase in sulfur concentration in the leaves for all crops. Now we're looking at yield response to gypsum. So for the corn, when we had corn grains in some of the sites, neither in 2017 or in 2018 did we see an increase in yield in any of the corn sites. Now 300 bushel per acre is a little high. We estimated the yield from calculation, so it's a little maybe overestimated, but that's generally there's no just not any difference between the treated and the untreated. We had conducted this trial in forage as well on the organic farm, and this is the average yield that we got, and this is the summation of 3 cuttings. So we did the first cutting with the farmer, the second one maybe between 25 to 30 days after, and the third cuttings before the frosting. And so we added these 3 cuttings together, and that's what we call in total average. And we did not see an increase in yield for forage in any of the sites either. There's clearly a difference between sites, but not the difference between treated and non-treated. For the sites where we had oats and corn silage, we did not see an increase in yield for the 2017 and 2018 data either. The second study is the soybean. It's an on-farm trials. It was done in 16 field sites in Ohio. These are the counties where the study was actually conducted. We had 9 field in 2013 and 7 in 2014, all on soybean. And they received 2 tons of gypsum per acre at planting. And again, we did not see an influence of gypsum on the yield, on soybean yield. And the trifoliate R1 leaves was within the recommended range of 0.21 and 0.4% sulfur. these are the results for the OSU farm on soybean and corn for 2015 and 2016. Again, no significant difference. Only for Wood County, well, the data is it's arranged a little different here. So this is for soybean, and this is the corn on my right side. And for instance, for corn, we did not see a significant increase in yield. But for Wood County, we did see a significant increase. This is Wood. So it's split by counties. So for Wood County, we did see a significant increase for corn and soybean, actually. Only one out of all this. This is a result from the recent on-farm sweep trial. This is part of the tri-state fertilization recommendation update. And these are all corn trials, 27. And each little box is a county where we conducted this this trial, and we see some effects, some response, but not necessarily in the gypsum, in the sulfur, in the plots receiving sulfur. So for instance, in that 178D, that's this site right there where we see the significant increase, the control is actually higher than the sulfur treated.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
I'll just jump in real quick. Sorry. So two sites where we vast majority of the data that Louceline is presenting is gypsum, one application at a ton per hectare or ton per acre, and then we just see if we actually get a yield increase. 27 corn trials here. Nearly all of them are gypsum at 1 ton. The two where we see actual decreases with that treatment is not actually gypsum. It's a thiosulfate and starter. So it's with 28. So it's a salt. It's a salt, but I think 2 years straight is a salt affected decrease. And then she's got one trial where it's an increase with gypsum.
Yep. This is the result for the soybean sites. Again, we had two significant difference in soybean, and again in 412 that the control is higher. Is that was thiazole too, a starter in the soybean?
That's gypsum. That's not.
Yeah, it's well. There's some inconsistencies, and it's hard to say whether we're getting a response from the sulfur application or something else is happening.
Most of the last two data slides that she just showed, those are on-farm trials. Some of them are large strip, a lot of variability. You know, you can we don't have a lot of statistical power to say if it's significant or not, because often it's 3 replicates, a lot of variability. But you can just look. Hopefully, you all can see just the trends between that sulfur or that gypsum application is the S, and then that check or the untreated is the light purple. So just not a lot of hits. We're just not seeing very much.
Steve, you ran the numbers on those, and there was tissue samples taken. Was there any difference in tissue levels?
We haven't looked super close to that yet, just yet. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in summary, we did see an increase in R1 tissue that were taken at silken R1 tissue, and there's no evidence of yield increase as a response to sulfur application in neither of the crop. There's some sign of maybe, but it's not really evident that there's really a response to sulfur application. And we only had an increase in, let's say, 3 sites out of the 100 experiments. That's exciting stuff. So just to quickly looked at what may influence the response we get to sulfur. We not getting a response in yield doesn't mean that nobody else will get a response if you apply sulfur. So there are some scenarios under which you might see a positive response of sulfur, and there are some under which you will probably not see a response of sulfur. And some of the ones when you might have a positive response is if your organic matter is less than 2%. Then you might see responses just because your turnover rate is lower. So if you add some sulfur, you might see a response. And some soil texture are more responsive than others. If you have a poorly drained or a history of sulfur deficiency. Usually in organic farming where you apply a lot of manure application, even if the sulfur is not really available in the manure, but as the mineralization process takes place, you might see a response of sulfur later on. And these are kind of scenarios when you most likely will not see a response to sulfur. We also recommended that the soil test sulfur is not really a good predictor on how much sulfur you have available. The soil test sulfur just look at the sulfate, the soluble sulfur, and sometimes it's under some conditions is only an effect of the time or the space. It's a spatial variation of the soil properties you have in this particular time. So it's not a good predictor of either your sulfur availability or your yield response if you do decide to apply sulfur. So we recommend tissue tests for sulfur, and especially at R1 if it's in corn. You might do it in early bud stage for forage. It's just a better indicator of your sulfur status for the crop.